So in 2015, a movie called Tangerine came out, and a lot of hype surrounded this movie because it was this very low budget indie movie filmed entirely on an iPhone and featured a cast of never before seen, pretty much first time actors. The film had this very gritty, down to earth sort of vibe to it because it was made on a razor thin budget. Again, totally new actors you'd never seen before, putting on great performances seemingly out of nowhere. While this may seem like a gimmick, it gave the film this sort of DIY authenticity to it that I think made it feel really unique and really kind of special. And as someone who grew up in and around LA, I feel like it really captured something about the city. It has this frenetic, chaotic energy to it and feels like they kind of filmed it wherever they could. And it makes me think of a lot of days that I spent in LA with friends, going from place to place, getting lost, and it really kind of captured that feeling for me. Another thing that was really cool about it was that this was a film that really centered not just sex workers, not just people who were very poor, but also trans people, people on different points of the gender spectrum. And that was really exciting, but it also didn't treat that as some sort of strange thing. These were just people. It really wasn't even about that. It was just about these people living their lives. And that to me felt really, again, fresh, exciting, and new. So Tangerine was written and directed by Sean Baker. And now 10 years later, we have Sean Baker coming back. He's had a couple films in the meantime that I unfortunately haven't been able to see yet, but he's come back this year with Anora. So I'll just say I am filming this just a few hours after Anora pretty much swept the Academy Awards. Sean Baker won every single thing you can win for what he did with this movie. He won Best Director, Best Editor, he won for the screenplay, and then of course it won Best Picture. And then the big surprise of the night was that Mikey Madison stole the win from Demi Moore, and there's been a lot of talk about that already in the past few hours, and there will be much more. The TLDR of this video is that I think this was the right choice. I was thrilled to see Anora winning all of these awards. I went in thinking that The Brutalist was still going to get Best Picture, or at least that it was a 50-50. I certainly didn't think Best Actress was going to go the way that it did. I wasn't sure about screenplay. So I am thrilled, and I want to talk about why, because I think this film is a little bit polarizing, not as much as something like Emilia Perez or a lot of other films this year, but I do see some conflicting opinions about it. So I want to talk a little bit about why this film was special to me. Anora really feels like Tangerine from 10 years ago, but with a lot more polish, a lot more control, and a lot more precision, which is a word that I'm probably going to use a lot here. It's a film that constantly feels like it is at risk of kind of falling apart at the seams. It's really chaotic. It's really all over the place. It jumps around tonally a lot. And even though it still feels like a roller coaster, I think it gets to where it's trying to go really effectively, really efficiently, which is something that I find just incredibly fucking cool. And yeah, it rules. Anora rules. So let's talk about it. There's always this part of every review where you have to like do the summary of the plot. And I think every time I do this, I'm going to whine about it a little bit because you could Google it, but also it feels weird to not include it. So we're going to talk about the plot and the summary of the story. So let's do that. I'm so good at this. So Anora is about I need to stop starting with so. Anora is about a young dancer at a strip club. No, at. What is this at? I literally don't know how I'm going to do this in every video. It's so hard. I don't even know why. I don't even know what the problem is. Anora is about a young dancer at. Anora, what is the movie about? Anora is about a. Why are these things so? I feel like I need to just fucking type it out. This is gonna suck to edit, dude. Good luck, because I'm a mess. So I think the best way to describe. Dude, this is the hardest thing to put into words. I don't know why. Oh my god. The best way, I think, to talk about Anora's plot is to kind of break it up into two parts. So the first part is about this young woman named Anora, who is a dancer at a Brooklyn strip club, who eventually meets this young man named Ivan, who is the child of extremely wealthy and powerful Russian oligarchs and has seemingly infinite money. This relationship between Anora and Ivan quickly grows. They start seeing each other outside of the club, and eventually it sort of blossoms and develops into a real, we think, relationship. I say we think because it's sometimes kind of hard to tell, which we'll talk about later. It's hard to tell, what how real it is for both of the characters, really. But again, I'll get to that later. Eventually, it gets to the point where they decide to run off to Las Vegas and get married, unbeknownst to Ivan's parents, who have no idea that Anora exists. The second part of the film has to do with what happens when the family does find out, and these men who are basically hired henchmen, hired handlers of Ivan, find out about this and have to clean up the mess and basically work very hard to annul this wedding to save their own asses from getting in a lot of trouble with Ivan's parents. In that second half of the film, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that Ivan basically goes missing, and a lot of the film is about these three men plus Anora running around New York City looking for Ivan, trying to track him down so that they can get him to annul this wedding. And so yeah, that's really what the film comes down to in terms of its plot, but there is so much more going on here. But let's break it down a little bit. So the first part of the film, a lot will be said and has been said about the really graphic sex scenes going on in this film, where Mikey Madison is entirely nude at many different times. It is a movie where sex plays a very prominent role. There's been an ongoing discourse about the fact that the film did not have an intimacy coordinator, and Mikey Madison herself has had to address it in interviews, basically saying that she was asked if she wanted one and she said no. And so there's been a lot of talk about whether or not intimacy coordinators should be optional, whether the fact that they're optional puts young actresses in this tricky position where they have to decide, do they say yes? Do they say no? Do they potentially make themselves look like they're being difficult if they say yes, they want an intimacy coordinator, costing the shoot money or whatever it is? I think there is a discussion to be had there. I think it's worthwhile talking about. I think the people who say that there should just be mandatory intimacy coordinators on every set that has scenes like this, I think those people make a good point, and I think I agree with them. I think that is probably the safer way to do this. I think we also have to acknowledge that Mikey Madison is an adult woman who has the ability to consent in this situation, and that we've heard no stories about any other issues on this set as far as I know. Sean Baker seems to be, I don't know, a good dude. And we have heard nothing but good things about the working relationship between the director and these actors. So I don't think that this is an issue with this film. It might be an issue with the industry that could be addressed. And also, let me be clear about this, because there are some people who think that, they have certain feelings about sex and nudity in film and worry that it is inherently gratuitous, inherently objectifying to women or to the participants taking part in these sorts of scenes. Those people, I think, I just have a fundamental disagreement with. I think objectification is only objectification if a character is not given more depth, if a character is treated and written like an object, which she is absolutely not in this film. Sex in this film plays an incredibly important part in the plot, in the development of these characters and who these characters are. If Anora's sexuality was not in this film, this would be a very different film. These would be very different characters. And that to me is what tells me that it's an important part of the story. It's not there just to be titillating. It is there to say something about sex and about the ways that it can play a positive role or a more toxic role in our lives. Also, another thing I want to touch on is the fact that there has been an attempt, I guess, to sort of create a controversy around the fact that there are Russian actors in this film, and that obviously the topic of Russia and their invasion of Ukraine and all of that stuff right now is forefront in all of their minds. So obviously I understand why people would be a little hypersensitive about Russia right now, I guess. That being said, this is not a film that has anything necessarily positive or really negative to say about the nation of Russia. It certainly has very negative things to say about Russian oligarchs, about wealthy people, Russian or not. But I really don't think this is a very like pro-Russian movie. And let's please remember that citizens of a country are not responsible for the actions of their country's government. If that were the case, the entire, like all of us Americans should be in jail right now because we're constantly doing terrible things all of the time. We as in the country. Again, different things. I even saw a comment after Anora won all of its awards. I saw a comment on Reddit today on one of the, mega threads that someone said that it was kind of fishy that this movie was winning so many awards because they didn't like it that much. And it has to do with Russia, so this seems a little fishy. So incredibly ridiculous, and I'm not even going to legitimize anything like that. If someone is really thinking that, I don't know, the Russian government paid to have this tiny indie American film win a bunch of awards, I don't think that's worth addressing, but I just thought it was kind of funny to bring up that someone would think that. So let's kind of break down some of these characters and the performances going on here. So, of course, first we have to talk about Mikey Madison. So Anora is a complicated character who does not initially seem complicated. A lot of characters in this film present themselves as a trope or a type of character that you've seen before. And I think every single one of them avoids the pitfalls of those tropes, avoids falling into those stereotypes, and ends up being a lot more complicated and fully formed than you might initially think. In this film, we see Mikey Madison having to first perform a sort of fake infatuation with Yvonne, a fake infatuation with the other clientele at this strip club. We see her, in these sex scenes having to do this shift where she starts as sex worker who is just getting paid to have this relationship, but who slowly and subtly shifts into having actual feelings for Yvonne and actually feeling genuine affection for him. And I think she pulls that off really well. In fact, some of the ways that these actual sex scenes are directed is really illustrative of that. So at first, they feel like very quick and to the point. There, like I said, there are sometimes vigorous. This is hard to talk about on YouTube. We're going to find out what the limitations of what you can say on YouTube are, but that's fine. But they start out with these scenes being very like vigorous, almost violent, and then later they start to slow down. You see Anora coaching young Yvonne through how to have sex with a partner instead of with someone who, in their mind, they are objectifying, to sort of coach him from the objectification that comes out of a 19, 20-year-old to a more affectionate, real relationship. And again, that's another example of the way that sexuality in this film is an important part of what's happening here. It's not just for show. And then later on, we see her acting very defensively around these men. She has to perform a totally different side of herself when she meets I'm calling them the henchmen, these men who work for Yvonne's parents. And we see bits and pieces of the pain that she's ultimately feeling peeling through, but you're also seeing someone who has these guards up. It's a really tricky tightrope that she walks, because I think at first glance it looks like she's just kind of yelling and screaming, but you get these moments where something else breaks through and you get a little hint just from a look, a glance, a way that she reads a line. And then towards the end of the film, I don't want to spoil anything, but there are a couple of moments, well, I'll just say one moment. So if you've seen the ending, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but the final scene of the movie just completely broke me, and it is entirely due to Anora's performance and what she has gone through, what we have gone through with her. It just devastated me. Full ugly crying, and for a lot of the scene, there were no words exchanged. It was just the way that she expresses these emotions on screen. So yeah, I will just say, like, it sucks that Demi Moore didn't win. I was fully expecting her to. I was going to be really excited if she did. But I do think that Mikey Madison's performance is the better performance here at the end of the day. I think she's got a lot more to do. The film really is on her shoulders, even though there's a great ensemble here. Whereas with Demi Moore, I think the film is a lot more about the symbolism, the some of the shock imagery. I mean, there's a lot to talk about there, but not a lot of it has to do with her performance at the end of the day. She's honestly really quiet. She doesn't say very much. She's just kind of sad and brooding for a lot of the film. Again, I would have been happy if she won, but I think that Mikey Madison's performance is the more exciting, more nuanced role here. Okay, now to talk a little bit about Yvonne as a character. When you first meet him, again, he's like 19, 20, he's incredibly impulsive. He seems very dumb. He seems like the type of guy we have all met, this very entitled, young, horny asshole, right? A spoiled brat, basically. And then you get to know him a little bit more, and he becomes a lot more in the film. And eventually, I found myself feeling a lot of kind of affection for him, a lot of empathy for him when he starts to worry about his parents coming and learning about this. I felt scared for him. I wanted him to get out of this situation. I wanted them to run off together. I bought into their relationship and his affection for Anora. And then he changes more. And we get, these ups and downs with him where he's kind of unpredictable and ultimately, well, no, I won't say ultimately what happens. You'll just have to find out for yourself. But I appreciated and really enjoyed the arc that he has throughout the film. And then you have these three men who Anora spends much of the time with throughout the film, kind of bantering with, getting mad at, kind of being held prisoner, but not really, but it's complicated. And I love these guys. I love all three of them. The one who is, I think, a standout for most people, who also got nominated, was Igor? I don't know. Played by Yura Borisov, who blew my mind. I thought he was so good in this. Again, I immediately had a very strong opinion about who this guy was as soon as I saw him, and that changed a lot throughout the film. And his very slow arc and how he changes and evolves was incredibly effective to me, incredibly impactful for me. I'm really hoping we get to see more of this actor. But the three of these guys together kind of have almost like I kept thinking in my head of like the Three Stooges, like they're constantly yelling at each other, getting mad at each other, and their banter with each other is so consistently funny. That's something I haven't mentioned yet, by the way. This is like the funniest movie I've seen in a really long time. It has this sort of like almost Judd Apatow sort of feel where it feels very improvisational. There's this scene that is really where the two parts of the film separate, where Anora is alone in the mansion with these three men. They're trying to kind of subdue her. They're trying to convince her to help them while she's trying to escape. And it is a long scene, and it could have been the whole film and I would have been happy. It was so funny and so thrilling in a way, and I just loved it. It had this simultaneously this Judd Apatow sort of feel, but also this kind of Tarantino sort of feel where they're really taking a lot of time with this dialogue and you're not sure what's going to happen, and it's a total tone shift in the film from the first half, which is something this film does multiple times, and it always works for me. I love the roller coaster it takes us on because it never feels unnecessary or disjointed. It feels like a natural evolution of where this film is going. And also in terms of performance, something to think about too is that so much of this film, like there are so many extras in this film. They go to all these different restaurants, all these different locations around the city, and talk to these people who work there, asking them if any of them knows who Yvonne is or where he is. And a lot of these people weirdly do a great job. The film kind of feels almost documentary-ish, kind of like Tangerine. It feels like they're just going into these places and talking to whoever's there. And I honestly can't tell if that's actually what happened or not, because they feel so natural and really do so much in this film, which I loved. There is a particular scene in Las Vegas, actually, where they're I believe, inside a casino, and there are the people in the background who 100% do not know they're in a film. I mean, you can just tell. They're looking right at the camera, don't seem to know what's going on, and again, that makes it feel really real and lived in because these characters are acting like crazy kids, and people would be staring. So it really lends it this authenticity that I just absolutely loved. Also, I'm kind of bouncing all over the place here, but I do want to talk a little bit about the scenes in Las Vegas. So, like Tangerine, and the way that I lived in LA for a little bit, I also lived in Las Vegas for a little bit. And the way that this film shot Vegas, I found to be really refreshing in many ways. But first, as far as I can remember, I don't think there's a single like big wide establishing shot or like big helicopter shot that you usually get of Las Vegas. Every film does that. You see this big overhead shot of the strip at night and all the pretty lights and all of that. And that, as someone who lived there, always felt it feels very not authentic to what the experience of being in Vegas actually is. And throughout this film, Sean Baker never there are no wide establishing shots like that. Sean Baker always keeps us on the ground. He keeps us there where the characters are. We're always seeing things from their perspective. We do get one shot where we do see all of the lights and all of that, the horizon in Vegas, but it's because they're up in this high-rise hotel and they're looking out of the windows. We see it through car windows. We see them walking around, and it's the same thing in New York City. I am not super familiar with New York City geography, but a lot of it takes place in what looks to be like Coney Island. And again, we're seeing it with them walking around. There is not an establishing shot of a big sign that says Coney Island. You are just there with them. You are inhabiting a life. You are inhabiting the world that these characters live in at all times. You are present on the ground. And it's so refreshing to be in a film that is not explaining every single thing to me, that is not telling me exactly where we are, that is treating me like an adult and letting me catch up, and to feel the sense of disorientation, I guess that's a word, that these characters are feeling themselves. If you're running around in a city and you're jumping in a car, you're jumping out of a car, if you're Anora in particular and you're not driving the car, you are going to feel disoriented, right? You won't know exactly where you are. And that, again, really brings us into how these characters are feeling, where they're at, in a way that is really effective. This film is a film that has a lot to say, but a lot of what it has to say is unsaid by these characters. It's told in glances, it's told in tone. And throughout the film, there are these unspoken truths, these unspoken understandings between the characters that, as the audience, we slowly begin to pick up on, that we slowly begin to absorb. For example, early on, we don't know exactly why these men are in such a panic to get Anora to annul this marriage, why they're so scared of these people who are coming. Speaking of which, the people who are coming, so Yvonne's parents are a really fascinating presence in this film because they don't show up until the last 20, 30 minutes maybe, but they are a constant presence because they're always being talked about. This film often feels like a thriller because we know, based on what the characters are telling us, that the parents are coming, they're on a flight, they're on their way here. And every time someone hears that, they're like, oh fuck, like these people are dangerous apparently, but we don't really know why. We don't really know who they are, but they have this almost like to me it almost felt like a Lovecraftian like monster film sort of villainous presence, because we don't know what they look like, we don't know who they are. There's a moment early on where Yvonne shows Anora who his parents are. I think he literally says, Google them, here's their names. And she looks them up. And she looks at the phone and goes, oh shit, oh my God, this is them. And we're never shown that. So we feel the same urgency that these characters do. The character I mentioned that I was really excited about, Igor. I'm saying Igor, that's what it says on IMDb. I literally don't remember the guy's name ever being said in the film. I'm sure it is. So if I'm saying it wrong, I'm so sorry. But this character says very little throughout the film. He is very stoic, very quiet. But he tells that this performance tells us so much through his expressions, through the way that he looks at Anora, the way that he seems to have this growing sense of empathy for her, we think, but we're not sure. I found myself not trusting him for a lot of the film. It took me a long time to really wrap my head around who this character was and what his motivations were, which again, I love. So it's hard to really explain why I love this movie so much without kind of spoiling the way the plot resolves at the end. So I'm going to try my best not to while I talk about this. I found myself over the course of the film beginning to come to realizations about these characters and who they are to each other and what their place is in the world that I found profoundly affecting. And the way that the film communicates this, again, I think is done incredibly efficiently and carefully. There is a sleight of hand happening here where when that realization dawns on you towards the end of the film, for me at least, I was thinking, oh my God, why didn't this occur to me before? At some point, Anora stops being about these individual people and their relationships to each other and starts being more about us. These characters begin to realize, or at least we begin to realize about them, that they are all doing the same thing here. They are all contorting themselves and their lives around the problems of this wealthy family who basically own them, who hire them to live their lives for them so that they don't have to live their lives, to take on the responsibilities of their mistakes so that they don't have to. And to anyone who works a middle class job for some sort of corporate entity or has done that in the past, that will be very familiar to you. That will be something that you relate to and identify with, I think. At least I did. And because these people are all powerful, unknowable, it puts them at this distance, and you realize that, like, you realize something about Yvonne in this process too. You realize that while it seems initially like it's Anora and Yvonne against the world, there is this incredible dramatic shift that happens where you start to see that, like, no, Anora is much more like these three men than she is like Yvonne. Something I love about the film is that these wealthy oligarchs, we almost, like, most of what we see of them is in a plane. They're literally in a private jet, or just getting off of it or just getting back on it. They never physically enter the world of these characters. You don't see them walking around in the city or a part of the world. They are completely detached. Even Yvonne spends most of the movie not there, or at least the second half of the movie not there. The film is always reinforcing for us that these people are separate. They live a totally separate life, detached from the reality of the people who are doing their dirty work for them and solving all of their problems for them. There's a level of empathy that begins to grow between Anora and these three men that is really impactful, really beautiful to me, and is almost kind of like class solidarity in a way that I just absolutely loved and found really affecting. The way that these characters hate each other and kind of still hate each other, a lot of them by the end, or at least are resentful of each other, but ultimately recognize that they're stuck with each other. They are in this together whether they like it or not, because they're on this lower caste. And I think that realization is what's really at the heart of this film and what makes it so special to me. And the film is really able to get this point across without telegraphing any of this in a really obvious way, without explaining itself to us. It's a textbook example of how to deliver grown-up themes to grown-ups, which was so refreshing to me in a field of films who are very heavy-handed, some of them. I think of a film like The Substance. I like The Substance a lot, but I think its weakest moments are the moments where it is telling us over and over again what the themes of this film are. When you have like a Dennis Quaid character saying, you know, smile, sweetheart, towards the end of the film, and I'm like, I already understood. I already understood this. You didn't need to like hammer it home even more. But Anora is a film that makes you think about this stuff on your own, that leaves you breadcrumbs and lets you discover what it's about rather than telling you what it's about. Again, it's this sort of sleight of hand, this tightrope that it walks between giving you enough to understand what the film is about and to discover it and have that discovery feel organic without telling you too much or too little. And it worked really well for me. I spent most of this film having no idea where Baker was going with it, constantly wondering, okay, how is this going to conclude? I have this problem where I try to predict what's going to happen, and I was always wrong. I was constantly wrong, and I love that. That's a very good thing. But even though I didn't know where it was headed, I could see these narrative threads just carefully and beautifully coalescing by the end. It was masterful. It's a film that manages to be chaotic and messy and grimy and rough around the edges while still telling a really precise and clear story with themes that, again, are just perfectly woven into the film without being told to us too directly. It is, in short, everything that I feel like a movie like The Brutalist was going for, except Anora actually has a sense of humor. The end of this film takes its time. That's why it really lands well. Baker obviously knows that throughout the film it has been just like really fast. It is not really giving you a chance to breathe for most of the film until you get to the end and all of these things start to sink in, and suddenly it really slows down. The last couple scenes in this film take end up taking up a lot of the runtime because he lets them sit with you, and that to me is what is so masterful here. Sean Baker knows exactly what to do with this pacing. It's not an accident, but he's able to make it feel like an accident. So yeah, I'm gonna cut myself off before I continue talking about this film forever, which I could totally do. But this was the right choice for all of the awards that it won. Sean Baker is someone to watch and is, an emerging auteur. Really excited to see how he grows. Really excited to go back and watch older films. I've not seen The Florida Project, which I know is really important. So yeah, thank you for listening to me talk for a little bit. If you haven't seen Anora, go see it. And if you watched it and think it's overrated, please go rewatch it. Give it more of a chance because it's really, I think, a special film. I like the substance a lot. I like the substance a lot. I like the substance a lot.